What is it about the left? What is it? Why do they hate the United States so much? Why is it that they always side against the United States on every single issue? Whether it's the latest resolution coming out of the House of Representatives, whereby they are trying to condemn any reference to China when talking about the coronavirus, COVID-19. Whether by purpose or by mistake, China is responsible for the entire global pandemic. But because President Trump is trying to hold them accountable, of course the Democrats want to help push Chinese propaganda and downplay China's involvement in an event that has cost nearly 200,000 American lives and countless lives across the globe. But it's not just the coronavirus where the United States is doing all they can to side against the United States, where they are trying to hold the American people hostage towards funding their Christmas list of left-wing organizations that will refunnel the money back into Democrat campaign coffers. No, they must also condemn peace in the Middle East. They must side with radical enemies such as Iran in order to try and attack President Trump. And so it's amazing how they have now come out attacking peace in the Middle East. As The Atlantic is reporting, as stated in this article posted on Hot Air, The Atlantic is stating that authoritarianism is the big winner in the Abraham Accords. Authoritarianism is the big winner in the Abraham Accords, while Iran and Palestinians hardest hit or something. All right, let me get this straight. You're in this article here, it spells out how The Atlantic is siding with terrorist regimes like Iran and the Palestinians who routinely engage in terrorism and unprovoked attacks on Israel, and saying they're victims of the Abraham Accord, while those who desire peace, they're the bad guys, apparently, according to The Atlantic. And so it goes on here. The White House aide who's named this agreement the Abraham Accords under the winners. A genius marketing move, though. I would have preferred the Isaac and Ishmael Summit. They're going to go over the name. Or the Treaty of Ghent, for that matter. The Abraham Accord is grandiose for a number of reasons, including the fact that what was signed yesterday does not even constitute a peace treaty. Peace treaties are made between warring parties, and the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain have never been at war with Israel. My personal preference would have been to deploy the big gun himself, Abraham, the father of monotheism or whatever, for a peace treaty between Israel and Palestinians, which would be the thing that actually ended Middle East conflict. And so they're trying to attack and downplay a peace treaty. Yet it is a peace treaty. Now they're trying to say, well, they're not an act of war. Well, they were in a state of a Cold War, like the United States was with the Soviet Union for half a century. Right? This normalizes relationships, decreases hostilities, and basically ends what amounts to a Cold War. Now look at this. Under the losers, right? The Iranian leadership, Israel, and the United Arab Emirates, along with other Gulf states, have secretly cooperated with each other against their common enemy, the Islamic Republic of Iran, for more than a decade. The normalization of relationships strengthens this coalition, the members of which, mainly correctly, see Iran and its various terrorist appendages as threats to their stability and territorial integrity, and even to their existence. The Palestinians, a dark and cruel joke I once heard in Saudi Arabia. What's the difference between Arab Gulf leaders and Netanyahu Likud party? The Gulf states really despise the Palestinians. Once again, Arab leaders are signaling to the Palestinians that they have grown tired of what they see as Palestinian rejectionism, and go ahead and read the rest of this. But remember, they're trying to go off and tell you in the Atlantic that the peace treaties that are now currently going on in the Middle East are the result of authoritarianism. And I don't get why they're saying that. Just because it's Trump leading the way towards peace and global stability throughout the world, is it just because they can't stand Trump? Now, as we go through Hot Air, is trying to go through and provide a more balanced situation here of the winners and losers. But how are you going to say peace is the result of authoritarianism? Check it out, the Atlantic article yourself, the original article in the Atlantic. The left, they will attack anything. They attack peace, they attack democracy, they attack freedom, as they go down and burn cities left and right. But this isn't the only problem that we are facing here. It's not. But as we can see, the left, they don't have any principles. They're just against stuff just because their opponents are for it. But we can see that there's already fallout happening in the Middle East from the peace accords. The Abraham Accords have prompted some Palestinians to question their leadership, who teaches at the Dohan Institute of Graduate Studies. People are starting to voice their disgust and anger with Palestinian leaderships at letting the situation devolve to this degree and rightfully accusing them of having no strategy. If you were born anytime after 1989, you've not been able to vote in any Palestinian election. And I think really now is the time for us to be looking at this leadership and asking the question, not only is this the correct leadership, but whether this is the right path. So it's interesting as they go off and talk about this being authoritarianism and trying to attack the peace accords. We can already start seeing that within the Palestinian ranks, them seeing what the results are of the actions of their leaders. They're now starting to question, could this lead to a Palestinian uprising against the terrorist leaders and eventually lead to the end of the Palestinian conflict altogether? Now that would be something. That would be something that no one on the left, no one in the media, no matter how hard they tried, could ever downplay. This is why they got to attack the peace accords. This is why they got to attack any notion of peace between Israel and its neighboring Arab states. Because the more peace treaties that are signed between Israel and Arab states, the more likely it is that the Palestinians are, and their conflict through the leadership of the Palestinian people, if you want to call them, Palestinians. In reality, there is no such thing as a Palestinian. But if all of this, peace treaty, normalization of relationships lead to an end of the Palestinian conflict, well, that's what the Democrats fear the most. Because that type of success would be a landslide victory for Republicans for years to come, showing that they are the ones who actually understand what's going on and are the most capable of handling and addressing them. Another thing that the Democrats are doing here, and it's really interesting. So, as you remember, they launched an phony investigation into the Trump campaign, claiming Trump-Russia collusion, and they claimed to have all this intel, and all they had was a bogus document that they called a dossier that the Democrats themselves paid someone to manufacture. Well, since then, President Trump has gone through, and Attorney General William Barr are now investigating the origins of the Trump-Russia collusion. Now, one inspector general said, well, the investigation was done by the books. And, there's a difference between how you conduct an investigation and how an investigation got open to begin with. And even then, claiming that the investigation was done by the book or, done properly but with some errors, even that is a farce, right? We know from all the evidence that has come out that there was no legitimacy to the whole Trump-Russia collusion narrative and investigation, and that the Mueller investigation and the Mueller probe was a complete sham designed only to distract and help the Democrats cover up their criminal activity. That way, when the Republicans came around and actually investigated their illegal activity, they could say, oh, that's old news. We have all this, documents and investigation. So there was some legitimacy there. So it's the investigation into corruption is the witch hunt, not the corrupt investigation that happened initially. So as the Trump administration and Attorney General Barr are now looking into the origins of how the Russia probe got open, the Trump-Russia collusion investigation, and starting to subpoena people who were involved in that to question them under oath, well, the Democrats have a new narrative. They have a new distraction that they are coming up with. Senate Democrats are now calling on the DOJ Inspector General to review Durham's probe. Isn't that amazing? So it's just them going through this endless cycle here. So they started a corrupt investigation. They couldn't find anything in their witch hunt with which to justify the investigation. Now there must not be any talk about the whole Trump-Russia collusion or what the results of that was. And we can't take a look at how they opened it or conducted the investigation. But now that we are conducting that investigation, now we must investigate the investigator investigating the initial investigation. So they opened up a bogus investigation. We're reviewing and investigating their criminal activity. So they want another bogus investigation to try and delegitimize the investigation into the initial corrupt investigation. They always have a narrative. They engage in the witch hunt and then accuse their political opponents of being the ones that engage in the witch hunt. Meanwhile, the evidence of corruption and illegality on the Democrats keep mounting up, where we keep being able to show you where the Democrats are the ones guilty of the very crimes that they tried accusing President Trump of. As you can see, reported by the Daily Wire, Biden post-election Ukraine phone call leaked. Undermine incoming President Trump, vowed to keep back channel open. So remember when the Democrats were trying to claim that the investigation into the Trump administration was legitimate based off of the idea that it violated the Logan Act. The Logan Act, which no one has ever been prosecuted under that act and whose constitutionality is questionable. Since no one's ever been prosecuted under it, it's never been challenged in court. And since, the investigation, which was open under the guise of the Logan Act, never actually charged anyone with violation of the Logan Act, it still remains unchallenged because you have to actually have someone who's been affected by the Logan Act in order to challenge it. And so it goes on. During the course of the call, Biden badmouthed the incoming administration, saying the truth of the matter is that the incoming administration doesn't know a great deal about Ukraine and that they are unprepared for the transition. This in itself is inappropriate, but it was meant to set the stage for Biden's next statement and future plans. Biden then told Poroshenko, I don't plan on going away as a private citizen. I plan on staying deeply engaged in the endeavors that you have begun, and we have begun. In a matter of moments, Biden undermined the incoming administration, branded them as not knowing anything about Ukraine, and attempting to set up a foreign policy back channel for himself after he leaves office as a private citizen, which could violate the Logan Act. The Logan Act bars private citizens from engaging in U.S. foreign policy, although its constitutionality remains questionable and no person has ever been convicted of violating it since it was signed into law in 1799. Ironically, this is the same act that Joe Biden suggestion, the FBI accused National Security Advisor Michael Flynn of violating as a result of a discussion Flynn had with Russian ambassador to the United States around nearly the same time as Biden's call with Poroshenko. The blatant hypocrisy is unmistakable here. Again, this is another situation where the Democrats did something then accuse their Republican opponents of it. And while Trump and the people around Trump and his campaign were investigated, and the Democrats claim they were legitimately investigated based off of these claims, if you tried to go, okay, what's good for the goose is good for the gander, let's go ahead and investigate the Democrats for actually violating and committing the very acts that they accused President Trump and his administration of. Here it is. We got actual evidence, irrefutable evidence of Democrats' guilt. We have Biden admitting on video to using foreign taxpayer money to get a prosecutor fired who is investigating a company his son sat on the board of. And again, they claim, oh, no, there's no evidence. There's no legitimacy to an investigation. Oh, no, of course not. It doesn't matter that we have actual video and audio evidence of them actually admitting to what they're doing. It doesn't matter that we have actual video and audio evidence of them engaged in the very activities they claim, to justify, with investigating Trump people with. Wow, I'm getting worked up. I'm kind of starting to stumble, and there's a couple other things about that. But here it is. There's actual evidence against Democrats, but the investigation and investigating them, illegitimate political witch hunt. Zero evidence against Trump for the very same crimes. Oh, we must investigate that endlessly. How many people are actually falling for this? And the fact that there are people who actually fall for what the Democrats are doing are either people who are wildly uninformed due to the fake news media, or they don't care. They're lying hypocrites themselves. This is why the Democrats are trying to push mail-in voting, because everything is going horrible for them. But as we can see, as reported by the Epoch Times, 350,000 dead registrants remain on voter rolls. So this is something that we have talked about on my podcast and on this YouTube channel before, whereby we talk about the problem with mail-in voting, having everything go 100% mail-in voting, that the voter rolls are horribly inaccurate. They don't remove dead people. There's even people's dead pets on the voter rolls. And so just mailing out a ballot to everyone on the voter rolls will lead to mass fraud, will lead to voter corruption in the election itself. 350,000 ballots that will be sent out to people that are no longer alive. Now, is it unreasonable to think that the Democrats and Democrat activists would then take that 350,000 extra ballots and then use that to cast second, third, and fourth votes for their preferred candidate? Because as we know, the Democrats, they can justify anything, because to them, the ends justify the means. And so they'll go through and do this. And, this isn't even the totality of how many dead people or how inaccurate the voter rolls are. This is talking about dead registrants, in a particular area, but it's not talking about people who are on multiple voter rolls because they have moved around and were never removed from voter rolls in areas that they no longer live in. But by hook or by crook, the Democrats are determined to go through and win this election by any means possible, overturning the results if they lose, and trying to engage and open up the system to as much fraud as possible. Why? Because they know Joe Biden would easily be manipulatable. Plus they know that, a Democrat will basically roll over and let the terrorist organizations like Black Lives Matter do whatever they want. That if they burn down a city, that is the key to people bending to their demands and giving them everything that they want. All the power that they want. All the control that they want. And to engage in racism, whereby now your career will be determined by skin color rather than by your actual qualifications. That's what Black Lives Matter is pushing for. They're a black supremacy group. But they want Joe Biden because they know, as everyone else does, one, he won't last through the first term. So it's actually going to be a Kamala Harris administration, a Harris-Pelosi administration that will be the result if Biden, wins. Everybody knows this. Even Kamala Harris knows this, which is why she's already been slipping up and calling it the Harris administration. She knows this, and AOC knows this, as she has come out and constantly says the quiet parts out loud, where she has mentioned that, it's okay to vote for Biden because we can push him to the left. We can push him to being a radical leftist. We can push him towards radical left-wing policies. They know this. Biden's lucky if he even remembers, what day of the week it is, what month it is. Heck, anymore, it's a surprise if he even realizes what country he's in. Biden, his mental decline is such that they can pretty much push him towards any position that they want because he doesn't have the ability to remember why it's bad, what he said before, or anything, for that matter. He's an empty suit. It's going to be like that movie with Adam Sandler's, 50 First Dates. Every day he wakes up and he has no memory of anything that happened before this day. And so they're going to be able to push him further and further to the left. And Biden is just a front, an empty face, a figurehead. He's there to present the idea that the Democrats are not as extreme as they have really become, right? That he is more moderate and therefore, safe to vote for. When in reality, they're already planning on how to boot him out of office after the election for Harris and Pelosi to take over. It's really quite amazing. Now, there's another thing that is going on here, and this is the last thing that I'm going to talk about on this particular video, and that is Seattle schools are now pushing anti-police, pro-terrorist Black Lives Matter propaganda in the schools.
Peaceful fights for equal rights. When I first read this book, I was reminded of you, your teammates, your families, our Brook Mattapan community. Assemble. Take action. Create allies. Boycott, boycott, boycott.
So as you can see from that video, what they are trying to do is they're trying to set up the idea that police are bad, police are racist, police are horrible, and that Black Lives Matter is the solution. That you must all follow in line with the Black Lives Matter movement in order to create social justice and equality. The problem is Black Lives Matter is a black supremacy group. They're racist. They engage in domestic terrorism. If you look at a video that I had posted yesterday, you'll see that 95% of the riots that have happened in the United States in 2020, where the perpetrator is identifiable, are Black Lives Matter. You got Black Lives Matter going out, encouraging and celebrating people just going up and assassinating police officers for no cause. For no reason. Just go up, kill a police officer, and then gather outside the hospitals and chant, "We hope you die." Pigs in a blanket, fry them like bacon. We got terrorist organizations being promoted in the public school system, while those who are designed to help protect and serve their community are being vilified. And in Minnesota, it's really quite funny. They voted to disband the police, and now they're complaining that the police aren't there to protect them because the crime rates are skyrocketing. This is why I don't send my kids to public school anymore. This is why my family has made the decision to go through and homeschool our kids, which, by the way, the statistics show that kids who are homeschooled do 15% better on average on the SATs and ACTs for college admission than kids who went through the public school system. They get far better education. And part of the reason is we're able to cut out the propaganda, left-wing propaganda, and give them a real education. For instance, did you know that, depending on where you go, what site you use to homeschool your kids, you can start your kids off in economics, personal finance, and entrepreneurship right there in first grade. Stuff that is actually useful in life. Instead of sending them to a public school where they say cops are horrible, terrorists are good. So yeah, I go through and I pulled my kids out of public school and we homeschool them now. Now what's interesting is while they are pushing this anti-cop, pro-terrorist, Black Lives Matter propaganda, well, a teacher has been suspended and investigated because there was an assignment about heroes and stated that it's okay to use Kyle Rittenhouse as an example of a hero. Now, here it is, Kyle Rittenhouse. He was offering EMT services to rioters who were injured as part of the police trying to quell the riots. He was, helping to guard a property from damage. And what had happened is the Black Lives Matter were trying to set a building on fire using a dumpster that they had lit on fire, and they were going to put it into a building to burn it down. Well, when he put it out with a fire extinguisher, they got upset and they attacked him. Now, this kid showed more restraint than I would say 99% of anybody else put in his same situation. He only fired as a last resort, and even then, there were situations in which when he fired, it wasn't to kill. He wasn't just fire, fire, fire. He was, okay, the person has a gun. I'm going to shoot at them before they shoot me. Hey, this person is bashing my head in with a skateboard. It might be okay to fire one off in order to get away. Here it is. He showed restraint. His big crime was stopping them from setting a building on fire. And they attacked him. So when they say, yes, you can use him as an example if you want, as someone that you think is a hero. Now, I know the left wants to vilify him, but she gets suspended for this and is now under investigation. But if you put in a anti-cop, pro-terrorist group teaching into your classroom, that's fine. No problem there. And it's sickening. It's sickening what the left is doing. They have turned everything upside down. The left, I believe, is now nothing more than a pro-terrorist, pro-fascist, pro-anybody against the United States political group and organization. That it's no wonder that whenever they are in charge anywhere in this country, everything goes to crap. Because how can you expect politicians to go out and implement policies in your best interest to create prosperity for your community or allow prosperity to grow in your community for your family and allow you to provide for your family when they think that you and the country is horrible? Therefore, they want us to suffer. They want the collapse of the United States. So if their goal is the downfall of the United States, it's no wonder that wherever they are in charge and have their policies implemented, that's where things are the worst in this country, especially for minorities.